Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Tuesday, March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. About 2 weeks remained in baseball spring training when the games were shut down for the coronavirus, and now camps are closed. Opening day is several weeks away. I think we're looking at sometime in May at the earliest. On his first day back in Kansas City, Lynn Worthy stopped by to discuss what was going on with the Royals in Surprise, Arizona, what could have been expected had the season started on schedule. I think there was some good news about the bullpen. Hey, so in the second segment, we have a little bit of an interruption. Just to give you a heads up, Lynn and I were talking about the Royals' prospects at first base when Dayton Moore gave Lynn a call. So that's you'll hear a little bit of a change about 3 or 4 minutes into the second segment. So here's Lynn and I talking Royals baseball. So Lynn, just give us your schedule. When did you come back from spring training? We are recording this in the podcast studio, which is the last place I expected to be talking to you on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. So tell us about your return. When did you come back? What was your timetable?
So I came back on Sunday. So we're taping this on Monday. So I got back last night from Arizona. We decided on Saturday that I was definitely going to come back. We started talking about it probably Thursday, Friday, about whether or not there was a point of me staying in Arizona or not. And like I said, we started talking about that Thursday, Friday, and, a week ago, I didn't see any of this coming. I mean, I think a week ago was when we heard Monday. I was it was at Salt River Fields and at Talking Stick, and that's when we started seeing in the middle of a exhibition game the news about they're going to close the clubhouses, which we were sort of saying, oh, that's ridiculous. And then the next day we were joking about it a little bit, and a couple of days later it's like, hurry up and come on back home. And just about everything was shut down. It was sort of I guess everybody uses the term surreal, but it was sort of surreal to see how fast things changed.
We hear similar stories of kind of where we were a week ago, and this is running on Tuesday. As you said, we're recording it Monday. Monday, nobody had much of an idea, but then the Ivy League decided to cancel its basketball tournament. A couple other conferences announced they were operating without fans in the stands on Tuesday, and I can remember rolling my eyes is a little too strong a description, but I remember thinking, is it really necessary to do that? And less than a week later, the world shut down. That, I'll tell you, I think it does speak to the ability to communicate, get the word out, and mobilize. And this isn't change behavior over the course of weeks and months. This is over days. And sports is a great example of the ability to shut it down.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing to me was just to think about Tuesday, the first day they had the clubhouses closed, and we had a different media setup where they had to bring people to you, and you weren't allowed to even go, past a certain point. And I remember doing an interview outside, one-on-one, and coming back in. I was talking to Nick Heath, an outfielder for the Royals, and Whit Merrifield's in the sort of little hallway there where the bat racks are. And he sees me and him walk back through the door together, and he goes, "Hey, 6 feet rule." He's holding out a bat and saying, 6 feet away, 6 feet away, kicks up a foot, 6 feet away, 6 feet away. And so the ongoing joke that day was the whole 6 foot rule, and players would go by and see us all huddled in this little room because that's where you could actually talk to guys, and they'd poke a head in and say, "Oh, I need to stay out of this room. Who knows what you guys got?" And, guys were making jokes about how, it must be more difficult for us, and oh man, that must stink for you guys, this whole new setup. And that's Tuesday, and then Wednesday night the NBA shuts down because they find out that Rudy Gobert's got tested positive. And just me personally, I know a guy who covers that team who ended up having to get tested subsequently after that. So and then by Thursday everything's shut down. We were sitting in the media room waiting to find out what was going to happen with MLB. And you see it just happen, sort of tick off one by one. This tournament's canceled. That tournament's canceled. Kansas says they're not going to the NCAA tournament. Duke says they're not going. And then there's no NCAA tournament. And it was just sort of rolling off as we're waiting to find out what's going on with baseball. And eventually baseball suspended everything. And at the time was saying that it's going to be at least 2 weeks for the opening day, and we now know that's not going to happen either.
Yeah, that was my next question to you. The original thought from Major League Baseball, I think they had moved the opening day to, was it April 9th? Or?
Yeah, it was at least 2 weeks, which would have put it on April 9th. And as of today, Commissioner Rob Manfred had basically come out and publicly acknowledged that that's not going to happen, that they're going to abide by the CDC recommendations that no gatherings of over 50 people for 8 weeks. And you do the math, 8 weeks puts you at least into the middle of May before you can, start thinking about hosting games. And that's without actually factoring in how long it takes for you to get guys ready to play games again when you stopped before spring training had even finished. So we're probably looking at June before we see some Major League Baseball.
Boy, what kind of season could you have? I know this is, we're just starting now to think about an abbreviated baseball season, but now what we're talking about, maybe a incredibly abbreviated baseball season. I'm old enough to remember the strike year of 1981, where the teams played basically two halves of seasons with about 50 games in each half, and did the expanded playoffs and did the postseason that way. How many games can a baseball season have? Each team have in a baseball season, and it be a competitive baseball season?
Well, I mean, I think you may be looking at something more akin to that, where you're going to have, instead of 162, maybe more like 100. And that's just me, that's not coming from anywhere in particular, but and it's going to really, it's going to be really different compared to what we're used to. And I still don't know what it means for the rosters, because I think in years like when they came back from the strike in was it 94, 95.
94 was they didn't finish the season.
Yeah.
95 started a little late.
And I think they had made some adjustments to the roster because of late spring and everything. This year they had already made changes to the roster where they're going to add a 26-man. I don't know if they make any more changes just to accommodate this, sort of abbreviated season, or whether they'll try and condense the schedule, whether the Players Association will work with them to let them do that, because trying to cram more games into a short period of time could be a real toll on players, and the Players Association would have to sign off on that. So the season, I mean, we really don't know what it's going to look like, but we just know it's going to be different, and it's going to be most likely shorter. I mean, I think even in the release today, Commissioner Manfred said something along the lines of, we'll try and get as many games in as possible, which to me is acknowledging that the season's going to be cut short. They just don't know by how much yet. Wow.
And you think of, the players will be fine in this. It'll actually, from an injury healing standpoint, it's not the worst news in the world for people like Alberto Mondesi and others who are still kind of dealing with nagging injuries. The people I feel sorry for are the stadium personnel, the stadium workers, people who work the concession stands and sell the beer, and they're throughout baseball there have to be thousands and thousands of employees like that. So then that's true throughout sports, not just in baseball, but those people that are working stadiums and arenas in the NBA, NHL, that would have worked in the NCAA tournament. Those are the folks that are really affected, going to be affected by this. But even when you left Arizona, the players were basically given the option. They could stay at the training camp or go home. But and you talked to some who did both, right?
Yeah. Basically, MLB and the Players Association came up with three options. That was, you could go home, you could stay in the city of spring training. So for like the Royals, that meant you could go home, you could go to Surprise. Or the third option, you could go back to the city of your home club. So that would be Kansas City. So that your three options were Kansas City, Surprise, or home. As of Saturday, I talked to Danny Duffy, who was still in Surprise, and it seemed like he was planning on staying there and training there and trying to stay ready for whenever they did resume full camp, because camps had been shut down. Guys could still train there, but there was going to be really no organized camp anymore. But the facilities and the training staff, and I mean, there's still reason that you could see staying there. So Duffy was planning to do that. Whereas Whit Merrifield got back to me via text while he was on his way I think he was actually in the airport, about to get on the plane to head back to North Carolina. And then his situation. Every player's situation is going to be different, but his situation, he was in the process. He got married in the offseason in the process of building the house. And so there's still work going on building this house, which he was going to be around for it all because he was going to be in spring training. The season was going to start. He's going to take the opportunity to at least go back for a few days and be there while that's going on. And he also has the added bonus of, his father's an associate AD at Wake Forest. His brother plays baseball there. He was going to be able to use those facilities to train. So that's just two examples of where a good reason for a guy to want to go home and be able to still stay in shape and have the ability to do that. And like Duffy said, he felt like he wanted to be there and try and stay ready for whenever, because you have no certainty on when things are going to start again, but he wanted to stay ready and stay in shape and be able to work there with, the staff. Like he talked about, I asked him about, just how he was adjusting things. And he said he's deferring to Cal Eldred, the pitching coach who's still there. He was leaning on him for how to go about getting himself ready and staying ready.
So did you get a sense of, those were two examples, but how many did take off?
I'm not sure. I was trying to get an idea, trying to reach out to some folks from the Royals, but there's a lot of figuring out going on between them, MLB, the Players Association. And the minor leaguers are the ones who seem like they're really in the tightest spot because as of today, I think it was I want to say Ken Rosenthal put it out first, and I was able to confirm it that MLB PA is going to give you up to $1,100 a week for players who are on the 40-man roster or certain non-roster invites can get up to that amount each week for even if they go home for what would have been their spring training allowance to living expenses and things. So you can still get that even if you go home if you fall into those categories. But if you're a minor leaguer who's not making the amount of money that you would make on a 40-man roster or a major league contract, as of right now, it seems like you're on your own. I'm not sure. I can't say for sure if the Royals are trying to do anything in particular for the minor leaguers. You see some reports of certain organizations doing something. Again, I haven't been able to get in touch with some folks today. But you see where some organizations are trying to do a little bit for guys, but because they're not part of the Players Association and they're not covered under that, the minor leaguers are sort of floating out there.
I was, lamenting the plight of the stadium worker, but really, the minor league baseball player, I'll tell you what, they'd kill for $1,100 a week of living expense money while they're playing. I mean, they don't get anywhere near that kind of money. And I saw on Twitter yesterday some journalists talking about trying to line guys up for jobs in the towns that either wherever they live or the towns that they'll be playing in, because those guys aren't going to have much of a source of income at all with no baseball being played. And yet they're going to be assigned teams. I mean, that's going to happen at some point, right?
Yeah, and I just think back to the times because I covered minor league baseball in multiple areas of the country, and the guys who were basically who signed for next to nothing, they're just sort of hoping and wishing and trying to play out this dream as long as they can. Like, you don't get much money in the minors. You really can't. I think I saw just on Twitter today. Pitcher who recently signed with the Red Sox, Colin McHugh, he's with the Astros a few years ago, was part of their World Series team. He was just saying how, one of the organizations said they were going to pay the minor leaguers like $800 for, I think it was a week, or I'm not sure what the exact time frame was. And he was tweeting saying, it doesn't sound like anything. He said, but $800 when you're expecting $0 is a big deal. I mean, he's a guy who I covered coming through the minors with his wife in these small little cities that, you're trying to get by, living 5 guys to an apartment and things like that. I know guys who have worked in the off season, like substitute teaching or coaching or things like that to make ends meet in the minors. And there's some exceptions. I mean, the guys, if you were a first round pick and you had signing bonus money, sometimes those are the guys who might have the nice car when they're driving through the minor leagues and things like that. But the majority of the guys aren't those guys.
That to me is an interesting subplot of the coronavirus and how it affects sports. Is the lowest level of we all think of pro athletes as being all well off, and living the good life, but it is absolutely not true of minor league baseball players. All right, Lynn, let's take a break and we'll be back in just a moment. Hey, it's Blair. Hey, we have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns we have to offer. And it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. For your convenience, your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. A lot of subscription services won't tell you that. They'll just sneak it on there. We just told you. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. All right, we're back with Lynn Worthy and talking Royals baseball and the stoppage of play of all sports, including baseball. So, Lynn, we didn't talk to you for the last couple of weeks. What were some of your impressions of the minor leagues were deep into the Grapefruit League schedule and Cactus League schedule. The regular season was going to start on March 26th, right? The Royals at Chicago. So they were a good way through their spring training schedule. I should know this and I don't. I'm sorry. Did we have an opening day starter announced?
It was not announced, but all indication was there was probably going to be Brad Keller again. He made the opening day start last year, and I think it was lining up that way where he would be the guy. They just hadn't announced it yet, and there was a chance that you might have saw Duffy could have got the home opener.
Yeah, which would have been the following week.
Yeah, so. But that's what it was looking like, was Brad Keller was going to be your starter. We still didn't know where they stood as far as a fifth starter. I mean, we knew the four guys that I could have sat here and told you in January were going to be part of the rotation. We knew those four still were going to be there. And in the fifth spot, they'd even left the door open for potentially doing that opener deal where you have a guy, who gets you through the first part of the lineup and then you go to somebody else for multiple innings and, sort of lean on the bullpen. It didn't look like – Brady Singer still was in camp, but I was pretty sure he was going to end up going back to the minors. He was the last of the four first-round college guys who, everybody sort of latched on to as sort of the next hope for their pitching staff. He was still in camp. He was supposed to throw the day that everything got canceled. He was actually supposed to throw the day before, but that game got canceled. And so then they pushed him back to throw the next day along with Duffy, but obviously he never threw. So I think he actually may have thrown in the bullpen, but that's going to be moot by the time things get started again. But yeah, we didn't know. In the bullpen was still looking like, there were a lot of candidates there, and it was going to be interesting to see how that finally shook out.
How about Junis and Montgomery, the other two starters? Yeah,
it was going to be Duffy, Keller, Junis, Montgomery. It looked like Jorge Lopez would be in the bullpen. It looked like Glenn Sparkman would be in the bullpen. Sparkman still had options, so in theory he could have been in the minor leagues, but he was going to be a bullpen guy. That's what they had sort of, both of those guys had been fifth starters last year, but the organization really, looked at it and saw that they should be bullpen guys. Really probably should have been last year, but just because they didn't have options as far as a fifth starter, then they were forced into those roles. And then as far as the bullpen, Trevor Rosenthal and Greg Holland, the two veterans, non-roster invitees, both had looked really good. Both had success. Both had, had been sort of mixed bag the last year, but both looked like they were on track to make this bullpen. And Rosenthal was throwing. He was painting with 98, 99, 100 miles an hour. And another guy who was doing that was Josh Staumont, who had come up before and had some issues with command, but he looked like he was looking really good too. So there's a lot of things that were starting to take shape, and it was going to be interesting to see that final week, decisions that were made. But of course, all that got put on hold.
How about the first base competition? How was that unfolding?
Well, it seemed like you had two good options, where at the beginning of the camp you maybe weren't sure how many options you had or what things looked like. But by then it looked like you might have had two guys.
Yep. Well, then we were talking about first base and what's going on there for the Royals when your phone started to vibrate and Dayton Moore was calling you back. So we took a pause and before we get to what's the latest development, let's go back to first base quickly and how that position was unfolding with at least a couple of candidates.
Yeah, going into the offseason, Ryan O'Hearn had come off of just a dreadful, pretty much, season last year where he had shown a lot of potential, made the team out of spring training for, I believe, the first time, and then just, he ended up hitting, I think it was 190 something for most of the year. He had a demotion in the middle of it down to AAA where he hit well again and then came back up and sort of floundered a little bit at the end of the season. He came up with some big hits. He still showed the power. It's just consistency wasn't there. So going into the offseason, there was O'Hearn, and then there was Ryan McBroom, who they picked up at the very end of August from the Yankees via a trade, who had shown a lot of power in the minor leagues, but didn't show it while he was with the Royals last year in September, but did show good approach, good ability to get on base, was able to hit the ball well, he just hadn't really shown that power. So, of course, during spring training, both of them showed power and the ability to hit consistently. One left-handed with O'Hearn, right-handed with McBroom. McBroom also possibility could play some outfield. But it was almost to a point in spring training numbers, but it was to a point where you almost said, well, shoot, it's almost a shame to talk about platooning either one of them because they both looked like they were swinging it so well. But it was headed towards, at the time that spring training got suspended, probably a platoon between two guys who are hot most of spring training.
Okay. All right, so let's get to it. I see you've scratched some notes down. So what's the latest from Royals general manager Dayton Moore?
Yeah, he's still actually in Arizona. So he was calling me from Arizona. I said there's basically a skeleton crew out there, but he said there's probably about 20 to 22 major league players who are still there training. And he pointed out that, keep in mind that some of them are there maybe just because of the fact that they had leases for spring training. Some of them had family who may have been up visiting because, around the time of this happening, I believe it was around the time where, at least in the Kansas City area, I think there was some of the school breaks and things like that.
That's right, spring breaks. Yeah.
And so some of them had family, extended family that were in Arizona. And he pointed out, he said, Arizona, if you look at some of the numbers, one of the safer places as far as avoiding this. So it might not be a bad idea to keep family there together. So there was about 2022, he said. There's no formal workouts. There's no workouts in large groups. They're keeping the facility open for guys who are on the 40-man roster who want to be able to train there. They don't have the full staff there, but he likened it to the off-season because there's staff there year-round, and there's a lot of players who train there in the off-season even before you get to spring training, and there's a nutritionist still there, there's sports science people there, and there's members of the coaching staff still there. So they're still working there, but again, it's not anything formal. There's no large groups because of the recommendations from the CDC. And there's a lot of international players that they're keeping it there for them too, because there's some players that just don't have that option of going home. I mean, like there's players from Venezuela or Dominican, if they're not at the Dominican Academy, who are here that you can't just tell them all you're on your own to get home. So that's the other reason they're keeping the facility open is for those players. But as far as front office, it's just him and JJ Piccolo who are there, and they'll probably be there at least for a few days, but he sounded like they might be going back and forth depending on how many players still stay. But he expected that the number of players there may wane as we get closer to what would have been the end of spring training anyway.
People may not realize it, but that facility gets used quite a lot during the year. I mean, before spring training starts, college baseball uses it, and after spring training leaves, Arizona Fall League plays there, and so that field gets a lot of. And during spring training, either the Rangers or Royals are playing on it every single day, so that facility does get a lot of use, and so it is a full-time, a year-round sort of maintenance crew. There's always somebody at that facility.
Yeah, and there's still going to be people there. It's not going to be the full staff, but there will be people there, and even on top of the groups that you mentioned, I mean, there's players. I mean, like a guy like Nicky Lopez lived in Scottsdale this offseason so that he could be able to go back and forth multiple times a week to train at the facility, to have access to the nutritionist, to have access to strength and conditioning people. I think Nick Heath, I've spoken to in the past, has talked about, he comes home to the Kansas area, and spends some time there, but by the time you get to about January, he's headed towards Arizona to continue training there before spring training. And there's multiple players, and there's also a lot of staff that's based out of Arizona, whether it's performance, nutrition, and those people live in that area. That's where they're based out of because of the facility there. So there's a lot of people. It's sort of a natural fit for them to be working out of there. Meanwhile, the statement from the Royals today, just talking about the Kansas City-based staff, they've sent those folks to work from home. They closed the box office, closed the team store. The Kansas City-based workers are going to be basically told to work from home for at least the next 2 weeks.
All right, Lynn, thanks for stopping by, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for finding us at SportsBeat KC, and thanks to our producers, Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. A cap tip to Lynn Worthy for stopping by to chat Royals. I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to get used to a world without sports. I'm not there yet. But we will be here on SportsBeat KC talking sports in Kansas City. I hope you keep listening.